friends, I have a video for you today. This is my first of sort of year-end wrap-up type videos, and because we're wrapping up a decade, I thought it might be fun to do the best books of the decade. This is kind of a weird idea for a video because I'm going by publication date, so like the best book published in 2009. And the reason that this is kind of a weird concept for a video is that, like, I may not have read very many books published in 2009, and I didn't necessarily read them in 2009. So like it's a weird mishmash of books that I've read throughout the decade. What's weird about it is that, say I read a book last year that was published in 2009. It might not have made my best books from last year, but it might be the best book I read in 2009. Do you see what I'm saying? I don't know. All these books that I've put together, I love. Is it my favorite book ever in the world? I don't know. Some of them are, and some of them aren't. I don't know. I don't know what I'm doing, but we're gonna have fun anyway and talk about the best books from this decade that I have read in every year. We're gonna start with 2009. In 2009, I chose a nonfiction book. I've talked about this book before on my channel. I've encouraged other people to read it. I know it's not a book for everyone, but it was really, really, really good, especially if you have a little bit of a morbid streak. And that book is, shoot. I'm gonna try and do this with a baby, a bald baby. Like all my babies. She is bald. Look how cute she is, though. Say hi, Miss Marigold. Okay, this might not work. We're just gonna give it a go. Okay, do you need to eat? I'm gonna try and nurse on camera. Let's see how this goes. I'm also gonna try and do this no-handed. This is the third time mom, y'all. Okay, The Indifferent Stars Above by Daniel James Brown. His most famous book is called The Boys in the Boat. This book tells the story of the Donner Party, and so it's a very unsettling read because, as most of you know, the Donner Party was an unsettling event in which a group of people who were traveling the Oregon Trail got stuck in the Sierra Nevada mountains and had to winter there, and of course didn't have enough supplies to make it and resorted to cannibalism. So yeah, really unsettling, but a fascinating look at both what people will resort to given no other options in order to survive, or what they will choose not to do, what they will choose to perish for. It's a really sad story. It's a gruesome story, but it's also a true story and a fascinating story. Daniel James Brown focuses this story and personalizes this story by telling the experience through the eyes of one person who was with this group of people named, what was her name? Sarah Graves. It is narrative nonfiction, so even if you're not a nonfiction reader, this would be such a good place to start if you feel you can stomach the subject matter. It was excellently, excellently told. I still think about it, and I read this book 4 years ago, maybe? 2010. I actually don't own the book that I'm going to be talking about here, but it's another book that I read years ago, and I still think about it all the time, and actually it's another nonfiction book, and that is Unbroken by Laura Hillenbrand? I can't remember her last name. I should really know this. Laura Hillenbrand is telling the story of Louis Zamperini, who was a World War II veteran. It's another survival story, actually. It's Louis Zamperini's story of survival, both as a veteran, and then also his story after all of that, of his experience through PTSD and how that affected him, and then recovering and also forgiveness. It's an incredible, incredible story. 2011. In 2011, we have Okay for Now by Gary Schmidt. Gary Schmidt is one of my favorite middle grade authors. He is amazing. Okay for Now is actually a companion novel to Gary Schmidt's other book that I also love called The Wednesday Wars. It's not a continuation, it's not a sequel. You can read either one before the other. It just has a character. The main character in this book is a character that you meet in Wednesday Wars. The book's main character is Doug Switek. He and his family are moving away from the home that they've lived in forever. It takes place during the Vietnam War. It is very hard-hitting. It's very emotional. I cried multiple times in this book reading it, but it is it's Gary Schmidt at his very, very finest. This book, while it's middle grade, like I said, it deals with some hard stuff and some real stuff, especially because it takes place during the Vietnam War. There's lovely aspects of friendship in this book. There's also abuse and also PTSD. His brother comes back from the war and is not the same. It is beautiful, it is heartbreaking, it is absolutely wonderful, and like I said, Gary Schmidt at his very finest. Even if you don't read middle grade, this is one of those books that will convince you that middle grade is worthwhile and has amazing things to offer adult readers. I highly, highly recommend OK for Now. 2012, we have my favorite Kate Morton book, The Secret Keeper. This is World War II historical fiction, although like in all of Kate Morton's books, it is a dual timeline. You are following a family that has a secret in the past that is being uncovered in present day. Okay, let's try this again. Kate Morton's books are all slow burns, and this is no exception. The way that Kate Morton weaves this particular story together is so satisfying. It just is wonderful. I remember really loving the characters. I remember loving the family. I loved kind of the unraveling of a mystery. And this, I think, is the book that Kate Morton does that best in. 2013. I don't know why she's fussing right now. She usually doesn't fuss at this time of the day. Oh dear. Oh, I just got spit up on. I'm going to mention another nonfiction book. This list seems incredibly nonfiction heavy, which is funny because I really read more fiction than nonfiction, but usually the nonfiction books that I love, I really love. The book that I'm going to mention for 2013 is Bread and Wine by Shauna Nyquist. I love food writing and I love food memoirs, and this might be my very favorite of them all. I haven't read all of the food memoirs in the world. I have read Ruth Reichl, who I also love, but something about this book just sung to me. It's about how food and also fellowship are so good for our souls. You know, she talks about how not everything in your house needs to be perfect in order to be a good host. No one's going to remember that. What they're going to remember is the fellowship around the table. I just thought it was so beautiful. I'd love to reread it. What I'd really love to do sometime is get a group of friends together, read this book, and get together weekly, and then have fellowship around the table and talk about it. 2014, and we are losing light, my friends, so I need to get going. It is only 2 o'clock in the afternoon right now, but it's such a gray and dismal day that the light outside is just not great for filming videos. So we're gonna try and move a little bit more quickly, although I don't know really how to do that when I'm filming a video. I'm long-winded, my friends. I have a lot to say about books and I don't know how to shorten it. This next book sort of ignited my love for apocalyptic literature, of which I haven't actually read a ton, but I just love the idea of exploring what it means to maintain our humanity when civilization is gone. Some books do it better than others. I think this next book I'm going to talk about does it best, and you've probably all heard about it because it is a booktube / just bookish world darling, and that is Station 11 by Emily St. John Mandel. It is like the gold standard, in my opinion, of what post-apocalyptic fiction should be like. As all post-apocalyptic books are, it was very bleak. And yet why I think this book explores that tension between how we maintain our humanity when civilization has been devastated, when we have lost so much and the rule of law no longer exists, is because of what it chooses to explore about that tension. One of the characters in this book uses a quote from a Star Trek movie, and that is, because survival is insufficient. Life is about more than just surviving. We will always be in search of something that connects us to each other and to the world around us. And that is what drives us to flourish and to create. It's the hope of something more that pushes us forward. And yeah, and I think that this book does that beautifully. I loved it. 2015, I have another middle grade book to share with you as my favorite book for 2015. This is another World War II historical fiction, but like I said, this one's middle grade, not adult fiction. I should probably tell you what the book is, right? The book is Echo by Pam Munoz Ryan. This book is separated into 3 sort of separate stories. In each separate section, it follows 3 different characters. The thread that connects these characters is sort of a magical harmonica. The origin story of the harmonica is told, it's sort of sandwiched at the beginning and the end of this book. And it's kind of a magical fairy tale-esque story about this harmonica, but the 3 characters that it follows and their stories are all grounded very much in reality, and that reality is World War II. This book is beautiful. It's another middle grade book that deals with really, really hard things in such an incredible way. It's another book where I cried, especially at the end of the book. All three of these stories come together and you see how they fit, you see how they're connected apart from this sort of magical harmonica that finds all three of them. It connects in an even bigger way, and oh my goodness, I cried buckets of tears reading this book. If you are an audiobook listener, this book on audio, it is incredible. This is one of the best middle grade books I've ever read. 2016. I have another middle grade book for you, and it's another one of my very favorite all-time middle grade books, The Girl Who Drank the Moon by Kelly Barnhill. I read The Girl Who Drank the Moon and Echo during middle grade March last year in 2018, and both of these books blew my mind. They were absolutely incredible. This book is a fantasy novel, and it is a whimsical treasure of a book. It's one of those middle grade books, like all the middle grade books that I've mentioned, that is sort of like a Pixar novel or a Pixar movie in that it works on two different levels. Like a Pixar movie, it is enjoyed by kids, right? Like there's that simple through line that kids can connect with and enjoy, but there's also this deeper level, these things that kind of will probably go over kids' heads, but that adults relate to and find deep and lovely, and that is what happens in The Girl Who Drank the Moon. It has beautiful writing, quirky, relatable characters. One of my favorite characters in this book is a swamp monster named Glurk, which I just think is perfect. It also features a tiny dragon with delusions of grandeur. This book is about a town in the middle of a forest, and every year this town believes that it has to sacrifice one of its children to this witch who lives outside of the town. This witch that they're talking about is Zan. They have an entirely different idea of who Zan is, because Zan, who finds these sacrifices, these babies left out in the woods every year, has no idea why this community is leaving their children up for dead. So she takes it upon herself to carry this child from one side of the woods to the other, and she delivers this child to a community and a family who will love it. One year she finds a child, she picks it up, and as she's traveling with the child to this community, she accidentally feeds the girl moonlight, which gives this child magical powers. And so instead of delivering this child to the other side of the forest, she takes this child in and raises it as her own. And thus begins the tale of this story. It is a plot that will make your heart grow bigger and bigger and bigger. It is about hope in the midst of suffering, forgiveness in the midst of failure, and loving so big and so much that no one is left out. This book also deals with consequences, particularly the consequences of power unchecked, the consequences of hiding from our memories, and most of all, pushing down and running from the pain and sorrow in our lives and what that can do to us. I loved this book. Please, please read it. It is just absolutely wonderful. This is one of those years where I had more than one book and I couldn't choose between both of them. The second book I have to talk about is an adult book, and it is completely different from The Girl Who Drank the Moon. And that is Beartown by Frederick Bachman. Most of you have probably read this book, and if you haven't read it, you've at least heard about it. And if you haven't heard about it, then you might be living under a rock. This book follows a socioeconomically depressed community who feel that all they have going for them is their hockey team. One day, a member of this hockey team is accused of raping a girl, and the girl is the daughter of the hockey team's manager. It is very hard-hitting. You ask yourself so many questions. There's a lot of gray in this book. I found it extremely timely and just really, really, really well done. And what I mean when I say there's a lot of gray is that even most of the characters, I'm not going to say all of the characters because there is one character in this book that I absolutely want to rip to shreds, but most of the characters in this book are just filled with gray. They're real people, or they feel like real people. There's darkness and light in them. They're complicated people in a complicated situation. One of the things that this book made me think the most about was justice, and what is justice? What does justice really truly look like? I believe that justice is a real thing, but I think that on Earth we have a hard time achieving real justice, and this book explores that so well. Its themes are rich and explored with nuance. I do think that because this book deals with rape, you need to be in the right headspace in order to grapple with that. 2017. We have another middle grade book, folks. I just cannot get enough of middle grade, and generally the middle grade books that I love are the ones that I really love, kind of like nonfiction. They kind of sweep everything under the rug. I'm sorry, the light is just getting darker and darker as this video goes on. I'm so sorry. I really need to hurry. We have Nevermore, The Trials of Morgan Crow by Jessica Townsend. This is another middle grade novel that has kind of swept BookTube/Bookstagram. It's really magical and wonderful. It's the only thing that has ever even come close to filling the Harry Potter shaped hole in my heart. I got the same sort of tingly feelings that I did when I read Harry Potter for the first time, where you just know that you're reading something magical. You can tell while reading this book that Harry Potter was an inspiration. But in my head, it's more like how every fantasy novel takes inspiration from fantasy novels that have come before it, that are sort of quintessential to the genre, like Lord of the Rings and the Chronicles of Narnia. You cannot help but see those influences when you're reading another book. So I do see the Harry Potter influence in this book, but that doesn't take away from the enjoyment of this book and the fact that this book can also stand on its own alongside Harry Potter. I enjoyed every magical moment of this book. This book follows Morgan Crow when on the cusp of her 11th birthday, I think. She is cursed, and she is going to be sacrificed. But instead of that happening, she is whisked away to a magical land in which she must try out for this very exclusive group of magical people and the school that trains them. Hopefully I did that synopsis justice. 2018. I have two books again to share with you. One is a nonfiction, one is a fiction. The fiction book is one that has swept the book world again, so I'm sorry if this feels like I'm only talking about hyped books, but hopefully not. And that book is Kristen Hanna's The Great Alone. I'm going to tell you an unpopular opinion, and that is that I liked The Great Alone better than I liked The Nightingale. I know. Shocking. Blasphemy even. I really loved The Nightingale, but I didn't love it as much as everyone else did, and I also didn't love it as much as The Great Alone. This book takes place in the 1970s in Alaska. It follows a family. The father in this family, Ernst, is coming back from Vietnam, and he has been deeply wounded by his experience there and takes it out on his family. There's loads of domestic violence in this book, so once again, this is a book that you need to be in the right headspace in order to read, but it is fantastic. And like I said, it takes place in Alaska. It is extremely atmospheric. You feel like you are in Alaska preparing for the long winter ahead. As Alaska gets colder and colder and heads toward this deep, dark winter, so does Ernst's mental health deteriorate as well. So it those two things kind of are happening at the same time, and it feels very intentionally done that way. In the same way that Alaska is an extreme place that pushes people to its very limits, this book pushes the characters in it to their very limits. It is heartbreaking, it is painful. Ultimately, though, one of the things I loved about this book is that we are not left completely broken. We are left knowing that what is rebuilt with the broken pieces comes out on the other side even stronger than before. It is filled to the brim with hope and resilience, and I think that's one of the things I loved most about it. But having said that, I don't believe that this book is wrapped up in a tidy bow. There are some people that have read this. I've heard criticism of this book. It's too happy, I guess. I didn't feel that. The things that happened to these characters in this book, I feel like if it had ended any differently, I would have wanted to throw this book across the room as just being way too depressing. Like, they are affected for the rest of their lives by what they've gone through in this book, and I feel like that the modicum of relief that they've been given at the end is just perfect. So I don't feel that way about the ending of this book, but I know that there are some people that do. The other book published in 2018 that I absolutely loved is a middle grade nonfiction book, and that is House of Dreams. It's a biography of Ellen Montgomery, which I've never read any of the other biographies of Ellen Montgomery, so this was my first deep dive into the life of Maud. And while this is a middle grade book, Maud's life was so tragic, and this book does not shy away from those things. I don't think I've ever cried as much as I cried at the end of a nonfiction book as I did with House of Dreams, which is why I had to include it on a list of favorites, because this book affected me so deeply. One of the things that I left this book feeling was just how grateful I am to Ellen Montgomery for gifting the world with the book Anne of Green Gables. And of course, Anne of Green Gables is probably my favorite book of all time. I love it to the depths of my soul. That book has molded and shaped me probably more than any other book, partly because I read it when I was a kid, and all the books that we read when we're children shape us more than any other books that we read in our lives. What this book made me reflect on is how that book, Anne of Green Gables, is filled to the brim with cheerful optimism. And it's not that Anne has led this storybook life. She comes from a life of pain, and her transition to Green Gables is not an easy one. And yet, she remains so pleasant and optimistic. It is filled with hope and light and the sweetness of this life that we've been given, even in the midst of pain and hardship. That, in juxtaposition with this book, when Maud struggled so much with her own mental health and the sadness in her life and wasn't really ever able to overcome it, there's just something so poignant about that. It's almost as if with Anne we get a picture, a vision of what life could have been like for Maud and what she really wished her life was, but was never able to have. Just like Anne, she loved the people in her life and the places that she lived deeply and passionately. She was vivacious and lively, she was imaginative and intelligent, and she followed her lofty dreams with fiery zest. But unlike Anne, she struggled to find happiness, and mental illness haunted her. Liz Rosenberg, the author of this biography, wrote with tenderness and affection for Ellen Montgomery, and that comes across so clearly in her beautiful writing. And while it made me so sad that Maud's life was filled with so much sorrow and disappointment, she herself made the world a much more beautiful place. And I think, having met her a little bit more fully and completely in this biography of her, I love her books even more. And that to me is the sign of a great nonfiction read. Finally, we have come to the end. This is my favorite book of 2019. This Tender Land by William Kent Kruger is my favorite book from 2019. Full disclosure, I actually haven't finished this book, so it could be that this isn't my favorite book from 2019, but so far this is definitely the best contender. It has swept me away. I love it almost as much as I love Peace Like a River, and if you have been around my channel, but at all, you know how much I love Peace Like a River. It is my favorite book alongside Anne of Green Gables. And similarly, this book deals with elements of sort of faith and miracles, and in a way that is really profound. This Tender Land is William Kent Kruger's retelling of Mark Twain's Huckleberry Finn. The writing in this book is beautiful, but also the characters in this book are just incredible. It follows the journey of 4 children who have run away from the Lincoln Indian Training School. I always get that wrong, which is one of the schools from the early 20th century where a lot of Native students were sent, and they were abusive, horrible, awful places for these children. And the Lincoln School is no different. But actually, this book follows Odie O'Banion, who is one of the only white children at the school, Odie and his brother Albert, and Mose, who is a Native American, and then a little girl named Emmy, who is also part Native American. Odie ends up committing a terrible crime, and they run away from the school to find a better life. They travel down the Gilead River in hopes of reaching the Mississippi, which will take them down to St. Louis. The prose in this book is gorgeous. The story is gripping. It has completely taken me out of my reading slump. I still am not able to read very quickly, just given my life circumstances with a newborn, but whenever I'm not reading this book, I want to be reading it. It's just gorgeously told front to back, top to bottom. I love it with my whole heart. I'm so happy to be ending this video with this book. I just think it's stunning. So there you have it, my friends. The best books from the decade. This stack obviously is kind of a funny stack because it doesn't necessarily represent my favorite 10 books that I've read in the last 10 years. So like I said, it's a little bit of a wonky list, but it does give you some breadth and depth of the kind of books that I've read and loved that were published within the last 10 years. Right? Okay, so with that, my friends, I'm going to sign off here because this video is stinking long. I hope you enjoyed this video. Remember to like, comment below, let's chat about these books. I'd love to hear your list of 10 books from the last decade that you have loved. And also, if you liked this, please subscribe. Please hit that notification bell. And that's what people say, right? I always forget to say that, but I think everyone knows the drill, or I hope everyone does. I'll talk to you later, my friends, in my next video. Bye!